Assimilation. Assimilation is a tool of empires. It forces conquered people to adopt the language, the culture, and the identity of the empire. The intention of assimilation is to erase resistance, remove difference, and create uniformity, conformity. But history shows us that assimilation rarely works as intended. Instead of erasing culture outright, it often leads to the creation of new cultures. Rome conquered Gaul and forced them to adopt Latin as their language and use Roman laws and customs. And the local language, Gaulish, gradually disappeared. But they don't speak Latin in France. Over time, Latin devolved. It became French and Spanish and Portuguese and Romanian. By the time Rome fell, the people of Gaul and Iberia no longer saw themselves as Roman. They had created new cultures based on Roman influence but shaped by their own histories. Rome tried to assimilate the Britons, the Celtic-speaking tribes of England and Wales. But once Rome withdrew from Britain, local leaders started to reassert their own identities. But then the Anglo-Saxons came. And so while Latin influence faded, the assimilation continued. We'll get to that later. An empire can force a conquered people to speak their language, but they can't stop new dialects and identities from emerging. Latin became French and Spanish and Italian. Rome forced its religion onto Europe. But if you've ever wondered why a lot of the Christian holidays don't make sense, or like, why are we bringing a tree inside in December kind of thing? It's because they had to absorb pagan traditions. People weren't giving them up. So the church just swept it all in and was like, oh yeah, Jesus was born at Christmas. This isn't the solstice. That's called assimilation. Even when people lose their original language, they keep the traditions, the way of thinking. The historical memory lives in your DNA. In the same way that the Gauls were forced to speak Latin and they turned it into French, enslaved Africans were forced to speak English, but over time they created AAVE, African American Vernacular English. In Jamaica they created Patois. And there's lots of these languages now, or dialects, that have deep African roots. Rome wanted the Gauls to become Roman, much like white supremacy wants to erase African culture. But black people in America have created entirely new and extremely powerful culture. They're building a legacy, a new history through things like jazz, hip-hop, soul food, activism, storytelling traditions. They've actually become central to American culture. The influence of the oppressed. It's almost like the more you try to erase someone's culture, the more oppressed people find a way to leave their mark, sometimes more than their oppressors realize.